we've gone over what happens generally when someone walks into a Scientology org for the first time, and that they believe psychiatry is simply out to hurt and take advantage of people. But what would happen if I went there for my Asperger's or ADHD? What would they blame my symptoms on, and what would they do to try and help me? And, Minkette, how does the Church of Scientology treat individuals with neurological conditions? For example, autism spectrum disorder. Furthermore, what is your perspective on behaviorally based treatments like applied behavior analysis, which has a huge empirical literature base? All right, when somebody comes into a Church of Scientology with the idea of getting help or getting auditing or counseling from the church, they're going to generally try to do everything they can to get the person to pay for the services and then get them into an auditing session. And if a person were to come in with some kind of neurological disorder like autism, they're probably going to have a hard time servicing that person, although they might try. Hubbard actually wrote in a few places, going all the way back to Dianetics, that people who have neurological conditions can't really be audited or audited smoothly. But he then developed this objective processing, which is touching things and looking at things and moving around and looking at stuff in the environment, and that is objective, right? It has to do with the objects of the real world versus subjective, which is, up in your head. A person with autism the church is going to be a little bit, I don't know, in terms of doing subjective processing on them, depending on where the person's at on the spectrum, of course, versus, but they might do some objective auditing, and they might even, depending on which church you go to, because Hubbard never talked about autism specifically anywhere, as far as I know. And I've never seen any specific church policies or advices on how to deal with somebody who has autism in Scientology. Same with ADHD, Asperger's. It's kind of like, well, how far along, where are they at on the spectrum? If the person is unable to respond to external stimuli, unable to respond to questioning, something like that, the church is going to go, well, look, there's not really anything we can really do for this person. If the person is somewhat responsive, they might do a whole bunch of that objective auditing, just tons and tons and tons of it, especially in modern times, because the church is already going crazy with, giving people hundreds and hundreds of hours of this objective auditing. So that's probably how they would try to deal with it. I know that's how I would have tried to deal with it when I was there. But it would be definitely on a case-by-case basis. And now all of this, everything I just said, is tempered by whether the person has had extensive psychiatric treatment or not. Church policy used to be that if somebody had extensive psychiatric treatment or psychiatric drugging, psychotropics, Ritalin, Prozac, things like that, that they were labeled an illegal PC. The church revised that policy after I left, actually, but somebody sent me a copy of it, and now it's not, they're more open to receiving people who have had psychiatric care. If a person has electric shock, stuff like that, they're still going to be like, no. But if a person, there were so many people coming in who have had, psychotropic medications that the church was like, well, we're going to have to change our policies on this, right? Which kind of shows you that they can change their policies when they want to, if it's, denying them some money. Anyway, so if somebody comes in who has ADHD or Asperger's or whatever condition, or no condition at all, but they've had extensive psychiatric treatment, there's a chance that they would simply be labeled an illegal PC and booted out the door. And then they'll be booted out the door as far as getting any auditing. They can train, right? But somebody with ADHD or Asperger's, might have a bit of a difficult time sitting in a classroom for hours at a time to study L. Ron Hubbard's works. So, it would depend on how capable the person was. And that's about as much as I can say about that. As far as the question you had about the behavioral remedies for autism, I don't really know anything about that. So it would be a little bit funny for me to try to go there. I looked it up, and looked into it, but I am no expert, or even I barely have any exposure to it at all. I talked with a person I know who has an autistic child, and she told me that it had been helpful for her child, specifically what you were asking about. But that's one person, that's a sample of one. So I feel a little uncomfortable talking about, the efficacies of autistic treatments, because I don't know that much about it. But I do know that I wouldn't go to a Church of Scientology to deal with it. That's for damn sure. So that's what I can say about that.